And my husband's here. My mother passed away
Got
recently.
that.
Gentleman in purple.
Mm-hmm. I may just do the one camera and that'll be good enough.
Oh,
Are you going to do
okay.
your presentation standing or sitting?
Sitting.
Wonderful. In fact, I asked
Should be all set.
Okay.
And it should be on and
he almost died.
perfect.
And so they're focusing
That be it?
on he's better, well, but so they're focusing on their
Sorry, so sorry.
Well, the chance of prayer. What's happening?
And I didn't have her say it was Nancy and my phone. I was like,
I know.
this is about? Yeah, well, once I figured it out, it was Nancy. But reading it was nice.
Yeah.
Sarah.
I was on.
Yeah, that's a great question. Most people know Reiki. I would say it is a little more broad-based. Yeah, it's a combination of lots of tools that I've learned from nervous system energy work to qigong to intuitive coaching. So yeah. I used to refer to it as channeled energy healing, but even that seems a little too gato.
Gato, they
It's
love
fun.
the
It's like the
heart.
office that I've been
Oh my
working out was
gosh.
just a block
Hello,
away.
buddy.
One who's 19.
Did you check us out?
Quite the dude.
Oh, Jake and I.
He's in good shape for 19.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, years ago, when I was and we just like, we actually had like quite a rousing political discussion. And got into his meeting with your
Oh, wow, fantastic. Oh, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, he did that. Cymber. I know, really, like Cymber. Yeah. What's your name?
Massage therapist.
Rachel. Nice to meet you. My sister's name is Rachel. Yeah. Are you musicians?
And then my friendship is, he's been fun and incredible.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, very cool.
Did you write down your business information?
So I do.
Jake is in a program that I lead right now. Jake and Ellen are the self-expression program with one of my coaches.
Nice.
And he'll drum.
He's doing coaching too,
Do you know
Yeah.
Gabrielle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend who used to do her
Yeah.
five steps, five rhythms, yes. He used to do five rhythms dancing with her back in Hawaii. Yeah.
Yeah.
She is
Yeah.
fantastic at
Yeah.
that's really so. Like, can I have a copy of that? She's like, nope, one time only. You want to hear my music? You gotta.
You can see.
Yeah, yeah. So very cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting. These days are going to be presented next week.
That's just the
You work on the places. Awesome. Presented places.
Oh, I did. I came in class. Why?
Just a program. It's called
So you based the program at Marne?
Outside of Colorado.
Yeah, so most people talk about the member form as an international company. And that's what ranks the full program is what's called the original. She's a 4 months long.
I did a lot of studies.
And so how do you actually bring the community to these projects back, you know?
This is my first one. Today I was like, maybe I should, the dogs,
Yeah,
like,
so right
one of
now,
my dogs
she's
is
a participant in my program right now, she's just in the front, and I'm like, she's like, there, you're so great. You just see she's really good, because if I'm over the wall, she's like, she's super, she's very.
What did you get me into here, Mom?
I was in a course with Ellen, but
I've done all of them. Flash after right there, like, I can remember this, all right, good. Right, I did. Totally.
I know, as a community of Ellen, people just probably find something on Facebook and it's like, over 19 years. You know, however else you share it, I don't know, but yeah. I mean, that's how I saw it. She said,
So when my friends would come and visit me, I'm like, okay, these are issues, just prepare ourselves.
my degree's in hospitality management. Years ago, yeah. And like I moved away from like hotel management, food service, into like coaching, leading programs, and things like that. And that's where it's been like, I've been in more like that, work, like working, you know, work. Like wellness means something different than it did when I was a instructor or a rent guide. And I spent my life doing wellness activities.
Hi, yeah, how's it going? Hi, I'm
There's probably somewhere.
I went through a whole transfer.
Yeah, or like what are the subtle things that make the difference? Even if you're not like at a yoga retreat for the whole weekend, or, you know, I've gone to Pablo and some of those kind of like yoga places, and, you know, there's doing the thing versus being on vacation and having wellness and hospitality.
Actually, cool.
In Denver, there's a lot of little gyms that walking and you can kind of see the rising different places. We don't think about it as a place to go to. But, you know.
I don't know, I love it.
Yeah.
I waited for her to give me the high sign.
Yeah.
You said it here?
Well,
Yeah, okay.
she's 23, 24,
Let's do it.
time.
Ooh, thank you all so much for coming. That was it. We're done. My name is Cymber. I was born here in Denver, grew up in Greeley, up north where the music school is, but I've lived the last 15 years in Hawaii. I just moved back here last summer. This is, I was telling Rachel, this is my first winter back. Oh my God, I've never worn so many clothes and shoes. It's been a couple decades since I've had to put so much clothing on. But I want to tell you a story about vibration and healing through the harp. So in my former life, I was a copywriter, worked for Feher-Peiker up in Fort Collins, and would probably still be sitting in a cubicle happily putting away, writing about stuff, computer stuff, except that I got sick. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna go back to work. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm gonna go back to work now. I'm gonna go back to work, I'm gonna go back to work. I'm never going back. I just can't get well enough and be in that environment. Something else, I've gotta do something else. And music was my path back to healing. I was at the time working with a Reiki master. I've heard several energy workers in here talking. So the Reiki master said to me, you need to go back into your childhood and collect the part of yourself that you left behind. The part that you had to leave behind in order to go forward in life. And I didn't know what that was, and I didn't want to really go back there, but so I put a question in my heart. I put a question in my third eye, and I walked around in my life like Dr. Seuss. I'm like, are you my purpose? Are you my purpose? Are you my purpose? Are you my purpose? And it didn't take too terribly long. It was about 3 months of that before I was around in December, 13 years ago. I got a Christmas catalog, and I opened it up, and there was a harp in there, and I had this whole memory of being a kid, because the whole point was to go back to my childhood and find the part I left behind. So my parents were very musical, my family's very musical, and they would bring us all the way from Greeley, all the way up here to Denver to hear music. And when I was 6 years old, they brought me and my siblings to the symphony. And that night, the harpist had a solo. They pulled her out from behind the bassoons, and she came out. Right? That's where they hide the harps, behind the bassoons. And she had that big dress, which you could hear in the 4th row. And she sat down and she played this music. I don't even know what it was. And I said to my parents, that's what I want to do. And they took me to meet her at her house. She lived here in Denver, principal harpist of the Denver Symphony Orchestra, back then, Denver Symphony Orchestra in Colorado. And she let me touch her harps. She had a lot of them in her basement. Who knew heaven was in a basement? But it was. And then she said, you have to learn piano first.
Oh, no.
I'm 6.
Yeah.
You don't know how crucial this is. But they bought me a piano, and it got me a really bad piano teacher. Perhaps you know her, Mrs. Bluehair. You might have had her too, Mrs. Bluehair. And I took piano lessons for several years, and I grew up in a musical community, and I forgot. I played French horn, I was a drummer, I sang, I played lots of instruments, but forgot about the harp for 36 years. Until this moment, I mentioned it with the catalog. I'm like, I'm grown up. I learned piano, check. There's no one to stop me, check. So I went online and ordered the cheapest harp I could find, which was not this one, in case I didn't like it, and it was just a beautiful piece of furniture. And then this is 13 years ago. Googling wasn't a verb then, as you may recall, and I searched and searched and searched and talked to probably a dozen different harp teachers before I found somebody who was brave enough and technically savvy enough to give me lessons by Skype. And that's how I did it. 3 years, I showed up every day, and because my teacher was a healing harpist, that's what I learned. Now, is that an accident? It really depends on what you believe. I was suffering physically, endometriosis, big problems, reproductive problems, no kids, lots of sadness. And here I am with this healing harpist now teaching me how to play. Okay, so that's how I came to play the harp. And this one came to me about 10 years ago. It's an Italian-made harp. It's electroacoustic, which is so you'll be able to hear it as coming out here as well as from the harp. And so in my training, now I'm going to stop talking in a minute and start playing for you. In my training, we learned different types of music to play for different types of things. So I'll give you one example, and then I'm going to play for you. So a friend of mine is up in Laramie, Wyoming. She's a healing harpist up in Laramie, Wyoming. And she completed the training with me, and she went to the hospital and they said, you play healing harp, how cute. That's nice. It's Laramie, Wyoming. They're kind of conservative. So you can sit in the lobby and play. So she did. She sat in the lobby outside the head trauma unit, and she played music that sounded a bit like this. So she sat in the lobby and played head trauma music. In a couple weeks, the doctors started kind of sticking their head out the door and saying, what are you doing out here in the lobby? Because our head trauma patients are getting better faster than they should. Not that we don't want that. didn't know what was happening. She got invited in, and she now is part of the head trauma unit at the hospital in Marne. But we had to show them. She had to show them. We had to prove it that it really works. And why does it really work? They really needed the science, of course. So that's the training that I got, and that's how I got it. It was through this experience of having been sick in corporate life, coming to this, and the kitties all love it. My cats and dogs all sleep around my heart. So part of my healing story is that I heard balance several times. I needed to balance myself. I was a hardcore work person and did very little else. I needed balance, and I needed to understand what balance meant. And so when I started into that, I started looking at nature and started looking at the seasons. And that's what I'm going to play for you tonight. I got very interested in traditional Chinese medicine, 5 elements traditional Chinese medicine, particularly because it follows the seasons. And if you know the book Healing with Whole Foods, this is a big book written by Paul Pitchford, who's up in Boulder. He describes very well in this book the seasons and how they act on the body. What winter is meant to be for us physically, what spring is meant to be for us physically, different things that it activates in us. Even in the tropics, we still have seasons. They're more subtle, but we still have seasons. And so I got very interested in that particular book, and I translated it into music. And so that's what I'm going to play for you tonight. It's called Seasons of the Soul. It was my first CD. It got played on National Public Radio a few years ago, and I was very honored that they chose to do that, and won a couple of awards in Hawaii as well. It's all improvised, so what you're going to hear tonight is unique to you, and it won't be played again. And I'm reading the energy in the room as I'm feeling this very powerful, very open hearts here, interested in healing, interested in hearing how this works. So we're going to start in late summer. Late summer is the earthy element in traditional 5 elements Chinese medicine. It's the time of harvest, and it's also the time of transition, and it's the time when you kind of wish it's not going to stop. Like that timelessness to it. And I want to check with you, how much time do I have? Because I could really go on and on, but I will keep it short.
You have 30 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay.
That's why I brought my kitchen timer. So I invite you to relax. Oh, and I will say there will be somebody who will fall asleep. It might be you. If you do, it's totally okay. I feel, right, snore quietly if you can. I'll try to tune with you. All right. When you come for a longer meditation concert, that section's like much longer and allows you to really just, fly into that space. Moving into, moving into autumn, it's the season of the lungs in Chinese medicine. The associated element is metal, the fire, air, water. It's air, lungs, air. This is a time of breathing, but also a time of harvest and start to pulling inwards next. And I have to say, my birthday's in October, so I wrote this section last because I didn't want it to be about death and dying, but it is. Leaves die, they fall off the tree, everything's turning inward, and finally when I got my brain wrapped around it, I'm like, this is really cool. Really like it. This is autumn. for just a second. So these big strings, you can see the vibration happening there. And it's actually rotating around this way. It's not just vibrating back and forth, but it's actually moving this way. And it's moving, therefore, the sound out. It's in a circular pattern. And so you're sitting actually you're all sitting in a pretty ideal position. Behind me is there's less vibration happening there, but more out here out front. And the big strings have not just this bass note, but it also has the octave and another octave and all the in-between notes. These are called harmonics or overtones. And the lower the note, the more of those tones you can actually hear and feel, because it's still going. Can you hear it still going? Right. Up here, they also exist up here, but this is such a tiny string, those vibrations are really tiny and they don't last very long. So when I'm playing healing music for somebody at bedside, I'm usually playing down here, one note at a time. All right. So winter, here we are. We're actually in the season of winters, outdoors and indoors as well. It's the season of water, which has been kind of a revelation to me, because as I said, I just moved back. I've been in Hawaii for the last 15 years. This is the winter rainy season. It's just colder. But it's the winter rainy season. So this doesn't feel quite as foreign as I thought it was going to. But it's the season of stillness. Just like everything stops. I'm gonna be inside. Nature is all stopped, and there's that. This is something you don't get in Hawaii. That quiet when it's snowing. All that snow absorbing all that sound. So this is the time to cool the surface of the body, but warm the core. And warm your heart. So this is a little bit of winter music and stillness. capture the sound of the dripping icicles. And there's